Before 1952, there was no such thing as a Queen Mother. The title didn't exist, not in constitutional law, not in royal protocol, not in any formal document going back 1,000 years of British monarchy. There was no precedent for it, no tradition behind it, no ancient statute tucked away in some palace archive waiting to be dusted off. And then one woman, a 51-year-old widow with a taste for gin, racehorses, and the finer points of self-preservation, decided she didn't like the alternative. So, she made it up. She invented a title for herself, and the whole country just went along with it. This is the story of the single most effective personal branding move in royal history, and almost nobody realizes it happened. To understand what Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon pulled off in 1952, you first have to understand what was supposed to happen. Because the British monarchy had a word for widowed queens, had one for centuries. That word was dowager. Queen Dowager, from the Anglo-French douairière, rooted in douaire, a dower, the portion of a dead husband's estate granted to his widow. The etymology tells you everything you need to know about the power dynamics baked into those syllables. A queen dowager was a woman defined by what she'd lost. Her husband died, she got a settlement. She was, at the level of language itself, a woman who had been paid off. And previous queens? They accepted it. Queen Adelaide, widow of William IV, became Queen Dowager when the king died on June 20, 1837. She retreated from public life, lived modestly, spent her remaining 12 years doing charitable work in the background. She understood the deal. The crown passed to Victoria. Adelaide's moment was over. She was the last queen consort formally and commonly styled Queen Dowager in British history, and she set the template. Step aside, be gracious, disappear. Queen Alexandra, widow of Edward VII, handled things a bit differently when her husband died on May 6, 1910. She was technically Queen Dowager, but went by Queen Alexandra in practice. Easy enough, since the new queen consort was Queen Mary. Two names, no confusion. But Alexandra gave an early warning of the resistance that would later define Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon. She dragged her feet leaving Buckingham Palace. She held on to the royal jewels longer than anyone thought appropriate. She behaved, in the assessment of multiple courtiers, as though she hadn't entirely noticed the reign had changed. Still, and this is the key difference, she never tried to formalize her resistance into a new title. She pushed boundaries quietly. She didn't rewrite the vocabulary. Then Queen Mary, wife of George V, widow from January 20th, 1936, mother of two kings. If anyone had earned the title Queen Mother, it was her. She never claimed it, never asked for it. She was simply Queen Mary. And the simplicity of the style reflected both her personal austerity and her acceptance of the hierarchy. The throne passed. She stepped back. That was the tradition. Graceful retreat. The word dowager. Widowed queens who understood that the death of the king ended one chapter and began a quieter one. Every precedent pointed in one direction. And then, February 6, 1952 happened. King George VI died in his sleep at Sandringham House in the early hours of that morning. He was 56. Lung cancer, and the cumulative toll of a reign he'd never wanted. A reign forced on him by his brother Edward VIII's abdication in December 1936. His daughter, Princess Elizabeth, 25 years old, was in Kenya when the news reached her. She'd gone up a princess and come down a queen. But back at Sandringham, a different kind of crisis was taking shape. Not constitutional, personal. Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon was now a widow. She was no longer queen consort. Protocol said she should become Queen Dowager. And here's where she saw her opening. because there was a genuine practical problem that needed solving. Her daughter was also named Elizabeth. 2 Queen Elizabeths, one of them the actual monarch. How do you tell them apart in headlines, in court circulars, in conversation? It got worse. Queen Mary, George VI's mother, was still alive at 84. She wouldn't die until March 24th, 1953. So for 13 months, 3 queens existed simultaneously. 3 queens, 2 of them sharing a first name, and a country that needed clarity. The naming problem was real. Nobody disputes that. But the solution? The solution was pure Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon. She could have been Queen Elizabeth the Queen Dowager. Historically defensible, constitutionally clean. She could have been the Dowager Queen. She could have taken any number of distinguishing modifiers that would have separated her from her daughter, while staying within centuries of established practice. Every one of those options contained the word dowager. Every one of them signaled that she was the former queen, the retired version, the one who'd been eclipsed. She chose none of them. Instead, in the weeks following the king's death, she adopted, and ensured that the palace formally adopted, the style Queen Elizabeth the Queen Mother. Not a dowager, not a former anything, a Queen Mother. There was no royal proclamation, no act of parliament, no formal announcement with a date anyone can point to. The title just appeared. It showed up in court circulars and official documents within weeks of the king's death, slipped into circulation while the country was still in mourning, and nobody felt like questioning the preferences of a grieving widow. A UK parliamentary research briefing references her in this new style with striking matter-of-factness, noting that George VI's death on the 6th of February 1952 removed his wife, now Queen Elizabeth the Queen Mother, from the statutory list of counselors of state. The manufactured title slotted into legal and constitutional language as though it had always been there. By the time anyone might have paused to wonder whether Queen Mother was actually a thing, whether it had any historical basis at all, it was already everywhere. The palace had adopted it. The press had adopted it. The BBC was using it. Done. That's not protocol. That's a product launch. And to understand why it worked so brilliantly, you have to hear the words. Say them out loud. Queen Dowager. The mouth moves downward. The second word sags. Dowager. It sounds like something settling into a chair it can't get out of. Something heavy and past tense. A woman in black. The etymological bones are right there on the surface. This is a woman defined by what she lost. Her husband died. She got a dower, a financial settlement, a consolation prize, a payout from a dead man's estate. Now say, Queen Mother. Completely different. Queen lands first. Hard, clear, sovereign. You are a queen before you are anything else. Then Mother. Warm, irreplaceable, untouchable. Not a widow, not a leftover. The most fundamental human relationship there is. Queen Dowager looks backward to a dead king. Queen Mother looks upward to a living queen on the throne and says, I'm the reason she exists. Look at the architecture of the two phrases. In Queen Dowager, the second word diminishes the first. It takes queen and qualifies it downward, into widowhood, into the past. In Queen Mother, the second word doesn't diminish. It transforms. It shifts the queen from a political identity to a familial one. And in doing so, it wraps constitutional authority in emotional armor. You can criticize a politician. You can't criticize someone's mother. Not in Britain. Not in the 1950s. Not ever, really. The title was a linguistic kill shot, and nobody at the time even noticed the bullet. No serious contemporary commentary remarked on the audacity of what she'd done. which is itself the ultimate proof of how well it worked. A title with zero formal precedent in British constitutional history was absorbed so quickly and so completely that its novelty was invisible. Historians would only begin to note the strangeness of it decades later, when distance gave them perspective. By then, it was far, far too late. But here's the thing. Inventing the title was only half the achievement. The other half was what she did with it for the next 50 years. 50 years. Let that number land. Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon was queen consort for 15 years, from 1936 to 1952. She was Queen Mother for 50. She spent more than 3 times longer as the former queen than she ever did as the actual queen. And in every single one of those 50 years, she lived as though the demotion hadn't happened. Her London home was Clarence House, the elegant residence on the Mall she moved into in 1953. She ran it like a small court. Her household staff numbered around 50 at its peak. Ladies-in-waiting, equerries, private secretaries, dressers, footmen, a treasurer, a comptroller, chefs, housekeepers, pages. This wasn't the household of a retired widow. This was the household of a woman who expected to entertain at a level indistinguishable from a working royal. And she did. Lunch at Clarence House became legendary in aristocratic circles. Multiple courses, fine wines, conversation that stretched past 4 in the afternoon, hosted by a woman who treated every gathering as though she were still receiving ambassadors. Guests didn't visit the Queen Mother. They were received by her. Then there was the Castle of May, a remote 16th-century fortress on the northernmost coast of Caithness, Scotland, which she purchased in 1952, the same year the king died, the same year she reinvented her title. Semi-ruinous when she bought it, she spent years and considerable sums restoring it, turning it into her personal retreat. Every August and October, she decamped to May with a full retinue of staff, and the pattern continued for decades, as predictable as the Scottish rain. 2 residences, 50 staff, a lifestyle of champagne lunches, steeplechase horses, and cashmere-wrapped permanence. And a bank balance that told the real story. The Queen Mother was a client of Coutts, the private bank that has served the royal family for generations. Her annual stipend from the civil list, public money, taxpayer money, stood at roughly £643,000 per year by the late 1990s. This was supposed to cover her official duties and household expenses. It didn't. Not even close. At the time of her death, the Queen Mother's overdraft at Coutts was widely reported at around £4 million. £4 million overdrawn. At one bank. By a woman who held no constitutional office, wielded no formal power, and served no function the monarchy legally required. £4 million. That's not a bank balance. That's a manifesto. She kept a string of National Hunt steeplechasers, trained, stabled, transported, entered at courses across Britain. She attended race meetings with the regularity and enthusiasm of a professional. The costs were not trivial. She was passionate about it in the way that only people spending other people's money can be truly passionate about expensive hobbies. And the gin. You can't tell this story without the gin. Gin and Dubonnet before lunch, champagne during, wine after. A daily rhythm of conviviality she maintained well into her 90s that the British public found endearing rather than alarming. The drinking became part of the brand, proof she was fun, proof she was human, proof she was the kind of queen you'd want to share a drink with. The kind of queen who would, in fact, insist on it. None of this, none of it, would have been possible under the title Queen Dowager. The word creates an expectation of modesty, of stepping back, of reduced circumstances gracefully borne. Queen Adelaide had lived that way. charitable, quiet, diminished. The title Queen Mother created no such expectation. It was warm enough to permit extravagance, regal enough to demand funding, and maternal enough to make any criticism feel like an attack on the nation's grandmother. The title was the permission structure for the lifestyle. She named herself, and then she lived accordingly. For 50 years. People bowed to her, curtsied, not because protocol strictly demanded it in every context, but because she radiated the assumption that they would, and few were brave enough to test the alternative. Her public manner, the hats, the pastel coats, the slow wave, what biographer Hugo Vickers called the imperial smile, was so perfectly calibrated to project regal warmth that resisting it felt rude. She smiled at you as though you were the most important person in the room. In return, you treated her as though she were. And behind the smile, steel. She never forgave Wallace Simpson. Never. Not for a single day of the remaining 65 years of her life after the abdication. She blamed Simpson for forcing George VI onto a throne that destroyed his health and shortened his life. That grudge wasn't sentiment, it was fuel. The woman who took the crown away from one man and killed another wasn't going to take it away from Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, too. Not even death would accomplish that. She would keep Queen in her title if it was the last thing she did. And the public? The whole country just went along with it. Queen Mother became the Queen Mum, the affectionate diminutive that proved the branding had succeeded beyond anything she could have planned. Mum. The nation's grandmother. The woman in the funny hats who liked horses and gin and waving at people. The warmth embedded in Mother extended naturally into Mum, and suddenly you weren't dealing with a constitutional anomaly living beyond her means on public money. You were dealing with everyone's favorite Nan. Try cutting the budget of everyone's favorite Nan. Try telling her she's spending too much. Try calling her a dowager. You can't. The title won't let you. She died on March 30th, 2002, 101 years old. Her daughter was 75 and had been queen for half a century. The country mourned, genuinely, widely, warmly. And in every obituary, every news broadcast, every tribute, she was called exactly what she'd named herself 50 years earlier. Queen Mother. Not once, not a single commentator, not a single editorial, did anyone pause to note that the title they were using, the title that felt as ancient and immovable as Westminster Abbey itself, had been invented by the woman inside the coffin exactly 50 years earlier. That is the final measure of success. When your invention is so complete that no one remembers it was invented, you have won. Here's what stays with me about this story. She was queen consort for 15 years and queen mother for 50. She spent more than 3 times longer as the manufactured version than as the real thing. And the manufactured version became more famous, more beloved, more real in the public imagination than the original ever was. Most people couldn't tell you a single thing about Queen Elizabeth, wife of George VI. Everyone knows the Queen Mother. Everyone knows the hats, the wave, the gin. The brand outlasted the reality and then replaced it. And now, decades after her death, the title she invented sits there in the constitutional vocabulary of the British monarchy, as though it's been there for centuries. When Camilla, now queen, eventually becomes a widow, if that day comes, she will almost certainly be styled Queen Mother, too. The precedent has been set. The manufactured has become the protocol. One woman's ego, disguised as maternal warmth, disguised as practical necessity, has written the rules for everyone who comes after her. That's not vanity. That's not even branding. That's power. She looked at a word, dowager, that would have made her smaller, and she replaced it with a word that made her permanent. She did it in weeks. She did it while grieving. She did it so smoothly that nobody noticed it was happening, and she lived inside her invention for half a century, spending millions she didn't have, drinking champagne she didn't pay for, smiling that imperial smile at a country that adored her for it. Queen Dowager would have been forgotten. Queen Mother became immortal. All because one woman, in the darkest week of her life, understood something that most people never figure out. You are what you call yourself. And if you pick the right name, if you pick the one that makes people feel something warm and ancient and inarguable, they will never, ever question whether you earned it. Subscribe for more stories like this.